All right, already gave you a morning Pitt video for today, for Friday, February 10th, here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. This isn't a new morning Pitt video, but, there's some things that happened after we recorded today's morning Pitt video, happened rather late at night, past my bedtime, and we can't wait until Monday to talk about it. And it's a big news event, and you see the photos that are cycling through on the left side of the screen there. Darrelle Revis, former Pitt great, elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame as a first ballot selection. And I said, we can't wait until Monday. We would have talked about this if it had happened earlier in the day, if it had happened on Thursday afternoon as opposed to like late evening Thursday night. We would have talked about it on today's morning Pitt. But since we didn't get an opportunity to do that, I said, well, let's just cut another video. Let's just talk about it right now. Darrelle Revis going into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, lots of different things to say about that. And we'll talk about what it means for Pitt and sort of, Pitt's legacy of Hall of Famers in a second. But as simply and as bluntly as I can put it, Darrelle Revis simply was the best in the game at his position for multiple years in the NFL. And I think we often go back and forth. There's always debate and discussion with these, halls of fame, I guess, whether it's Major League Baseball or pro football, about what makes a Hall of Famer and how you decide if a guy belongs or he doesn't belong. And sometimes we get, some of these guys, particularly in baseball, where, what's the joke that it's become the Hall of Very Good. And there's probably a few players in the Pro Football Hall of Fame that could make this case as well, or that we could use as examples here. But when we have these debates and discussions, what I often feel like it comes back to is that simple question. If you're really unsure, and you can go back and forth about stats this and stats that, and I'll probably use this phrase quite a bit today as we talk about Darrelle Revis in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. You could go back and forth about what they did and the numbers they put up and the awards they got and this and that, the success they had. But what it ultimately comes down to is this simple question. And if you're really torn about a guy, ask yourself this question and be honest about it. And that'll determine whether he's a Hall of Famer. Was he the best in the game at his position while he played? Was there a period of time, and you'd like it to be more than 1 year, but was there a period of time, maybe for a couple of years, maybe 2 or 3 or 4, where you said that guy was the best in the game at his position? And if you can answer that question affirmatively, then I think he's a Hall of Famer. And if you're not really sure, then I think it starts to get a little debatable. I think that's where you say, well, maybe he's not a Hall of Famer. Maybe he was just a really good football player or a really good baseball player or really good whatever, but not necessarily a Hall of Famer. Darrelle Revis was legitimately, certifiably, and I think beyond argument for anybody who watched the NFL during his prime years after he came out of Pitt following the 2006 college football season, anybody who watched the NFL 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, he was the best cornerback in the game. I was looking back, 2009, he finished second in the voting for Defensive Player of the Year behind, I think, Charles Woodson, who had 9 interceptions, 3 of them returned for touchdowns. Revis only had 6 interceptions and 1 return for touchdown. But I don't think there's anyone in the NFL, anyone who watched the NFL, or any players or coaches who would tell you that Revis was not the best. Rex Ryan has said multiple times about how they built their defense around Darrelle Revis with the Jets and built around him, but also they were able to do the things they were able to do and have one of the best defenses in the NFL because of what Rivas could do on the outside. Revis Island was a real thing, and his ability to lock up a number 1 wide receiver week in, week out, facing some really good receivers at that point. That was not a weak crop of wide receivers in the NFL during the years when Darrelle Revis was at his peak. And we get a photo of Rivas against Larry Fitzgerald there, which is a great matchup, a classic matchup of Pitt legends. But during the years that Rivas was in his prime, he was able to lock down a number 1 wide receiver. They didn't need safety help. They didn't need to double the number 1 wide receiver. They didn't need to double, Chad Johnson or Calvin Johnson or Randy Moss or whoever it was at that time, because Rivas would take care of that, allowing the other 10 guys, allowing Rex Ryan and his staff to do some pretty interesting things in terms of creating pressure. And I remember at the time, I can remember watching 2008, 2009, 2010, these NFL shows on ESPN back when I had the time to just sit around and watch all those shows, and they would break down how the Jets could bring pressure unlike any other team in the NFL because of the way Rivas played on the outside. He was that dominant, and that was a continuation of what he did at Pitt. And at Pitt, he was a force on the field. It was really hard to play against Darrelle Revis. And I can still remember one of the few times he ever got beat. I think it was a 2006 game against Louisville. I think Harry Douglas beat him on a route. And it was one of the few times I saw Rivas ever get beat in his 3-year Pitt career. And so he did the smartest thing and reached out and just grabbed Douglas's jersey. He knew he was beat. He knew Douglas was going to catch it. So instead of giving up a 75-yard touchdown, he just gave up a 15-yard penalty. Pretty smart play on Darrelle Revis' part. But that didn't happen very often, and it wasn't needed very often. And the other side of Darrelle Revis' game is that he was not only was he fast, not only was he a great corner, a great cover corner, not only great instincts and great ability to read a receiver and follow a receiver, but he was physical too. One of the more physical corners I've seen in covering Pitt, and even when you watch the NFL, there aren't a lot of guys who will hit the way Darrelle Revis hits. He is, he really was the best in the game at his position, and a first ballot election to the Hall of Fame is about as much of a no-brainer as you're going to get. It's a no-brainer just like Larry Fitzgerald, or Aaron Donald. We'll talk about those guys in a second about Pitt's legacy with Hall of Famers. But Rivas was an obvious option and still stands as one of the best players to put on a Pitt uniform. The best cornerback in Pitt history. I don't think there's any question about that. And when you start lining up the best corners in NFL history, he's not beyond the top 5. He's up there. And, I think you legitimately could have made a case for him as Defensive Player of the Year for one or two of his seasons. I think Sports Illustrated did name him their Defensive Player of the Year. He never got the official Defensive Player of the Year. Like I say, the closest he got, he finished second behind Charles Woodson. But he was widely acknowledged as the best corner in the NFL during his prime. For at least one or two of those seasons, probably. I think there was certainly talk about him being the best defensive player in the NFL. And he moved even to that rarefied era where you talked about him as I'd like to go back and see, find some of those countdowns of top 100 players in the NFL entering 2010 season or 2009 season. And I'm guessing you would see Rivas in the top 25, top 20, maybe top 15 of overall players in the NFL, if not higher, because he had that kind of respect and it was based on his play. He was the best. And now Pitt has 10 representatives, 10 former Pitt players in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, moves him into a tie with Ohio State for the 4th most of any college. Notre Dame and USC lead the way. They have 13 each. Michigan has 11 former players in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Ohio State and Pitt now with 10 apiece. And Ohio State, I think Joe Thomas, not Joe Thomas. Never mind. For some reason, I always get mixed up and think Joe Thomas went to Ohio State. And I think that's for a few reasons. One, he played for the Browns in Ohio. 2, Pitt had an offensive lineman also named Joe Thomas, who was from Ohio. But Joe Thomas is going to go into the Pro Football Hall of Fame next year, went to Wisconsin, not Ohio State. These schools, they'll move around in the next few years. The next time you're going to see a Pitt player go into the Hall of Fame, as a first ballot option, will be Larry Fitzgerald in 2026. That's the year he'll be eligible. I don't know if he ever officially announced his retirement, but he hasn't played, in 2 years or whatever. So, I think he's eligible in 2026. He's going to be a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer. Obviously, Aaron Donald. We'll see what year he ends up being eligible. I think if he plays 2023 and then retires, he'll be eligible in 2029. He's under contract through 2024, so it could be as late as 2030. He's going in right away. There's no question about it. He could walk away from the game right now, and he's a first ballot Hall of Famer in 5 years. So you've got 2 more Pitt players coming sometime between now and 2030. Are going to go into the Hall of Fame. And then you also are going to have this question in 2026 of LaShawn McCoy. And whether McCoy joins this group and pushes Pitt's total, ultimately, he will. If he goes in the same year as Fitzgerald, they'll push it to 12 former Pitt players in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and then Donald will make it 13. LaShawn McCoy is the one that's sort of an interesting question. There's debate and there's back and forth about it, and for a few reasons. He's number 22 in career rushing in NFL history, which is not. I mean, like, that's good. You're one of the top 25 career rushers of all time in NFL history, but it doesn't necessarily guarantee you a spot in the NFL because there is sort of almost a cutoff right around that spot, 22, 23. We'll talk about the guys ahead of McCoy, but the guys behind McCoy, like I say, he's number 22 right now. From 23 through 100, there's only 8 Hall of Famers scattered throughout that next, 77, 78 guys in career rushing totals. And of those 8, only one of them played since 1985. They're all like legacies and old guys. And the one that played since 1985 is Darrelle Revis. Obviously with the Broncos, played 7 quick seasons and won a couple Super Bowls. And so he's in. But everyone else is, Earl, 1985 and before. So that there is sort of a cutoff right around the range where McCoy is. Now, of the 21 guys ahead of him, there's only 5 who are not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Frank Gore is the number 3 all-time leading rusher. He's not eligible until 2026. Unfortunate for McCoy because I think that's the same year he's eligible. Adrian Peterson is number 5 all-time. He's not eligible in 2027. I think those guys will both be in as first ballot Hall of Famers. Fred Taylor is number 17. He's been eligible since 2016. You're going to guess that he's probably not going to make it. Steven Jackson is number 18. He's been eligible for the past 3 or 4 years. Not sure if that's ever going to come to pass. And then Corey Dillon is number 20 in all-time career rushing. He's been eligible for the last 10 years. So I don't think Jackson, Taylor, or Dillon are going to make it. And so that would seem to work counter to McCoy because those guys all have more career rushing yards than he does. But I think you come back to that question I talked about right at the top, that real deciding factor of, for me, whether a guy is or isn't a Hall of Famer. And it's a question I talked about with Rivas. It's easy to answer with Rivas. It's easy to answer with Larry Fitzgerald. It's easy to answer with Aaron Donald. What's the answer with LaShawn McCoy? Was there a stretch of time when he was the best player in the league at his position? Widely accepted as the best player in the league at his position. And I think this created some quandaries with like a guy like Jerome Bettis. I mean, Jerome Bettis was great. He was iconic. Was he ever the best player in the league at his position? I don't want to go off on a tangent down there. I'll get all kinds of Steeler fans pushing up the view counts. Maybe I should, actually. But was LaShawn McCoy ever the best player in the league at his position? Because Fred Taylor, I don't remember a stretch when Fred Taylor was the best player in the league at his position. Steven Jackson, a very productive player. I think I probably wanted him in fantasy football once or twice. But was he ever the best player in the league at his position? Was Corey Dillon ever the best player in the league at his position? He had exceptional years. These guys were not bad players. But were they ever the best player in the league at their position? And more importantly, was LaShawn McCoy. He did lead the league in rushing. I had his stats pulled up here. I'm not sure why I would close that. He led the league in rushing. Let me bring up his season stats. He had 1,600 yards in 2013. He led the league in rushing touchdowns in 2011 when he ran for 1,300 yards and scored 17 rushing touchdowns. He led the league in total touchdowns, rushing and receiving, with 20 that year, 2011. He had 1,300 yards in 2011, 1,600 to lead the league in 2013. He had another 1,300-yard season in 2014, 1,200-yard season in 2016. He obviously dealt with some injuries throughout that stretch. Only played 12 games in 2012, only played 12 games in 2015. But I would contend that there was a significant stretch there. Probably 1, 2, 3, 4... at least 4, if not 6 years, again, hampered by injury, but 6 years, maybe just 4, where you would say he was the best running back in the NFL. And I think, when you look at who he was kind of competing against for that title, in 2011, he was fourth in the NFL in rushing yards. And he was behind, I had it pulled up. It's so annoying trying to navigate these websites. Maurice Jones-Drew, Ray Rice, and Michael Turner. And he was fourth. So, I mean, that year, maybe you would take MJD over McCoy. Ray Rice was really good, but he only had about 50 yards more than McCoy did. 2014, he was third in the NFL with 1,300 rushing yards. Where did that rank? That was, like I said, that was third. He was behind DeMarco Murray and Le'Veon Bell. I mean, Murray was ridiculous that year at 1,800 yards, but McCoy, I think, because of his dual threat ability, to rush and catch passes, I feel like you could make a pretty good case that he was the best running back in the league there. So I think with McCoy, it'll come down to voters remembering what they thought of him at the time. And was he the best running back in the NFL for 3-4 years? I would say he was, but was he, can you make a strong enough case for it to get him in as a first ballot Hall of Famer? And I start to worry, if he doesn't make it on the first ballot, are they really going to come back to him later? He might get stuck in this Steven Jackson, Corey Dillon, Fred Taylor, no man's land, where he just kind of drifts around. I think he was one of the best backs in the NFL for that stretch, but we'll see what the voters end up deciding. There was no question, though, about Darrelle Revis. So congratulations to Darrell, Aliquippa native, Pitt great, Pitt legend, and now Pro Football Hall of Famer. Very deserving, and I think, like I say, a no-brainer. No surprise. And it's not going to be a surprise when Larry Fitzgerald is a first ballot Hall of Famer, and it's not going to be a surprise when Aaron Donald is a first ballot Hall of Famer. Those guys are coming, and that'll push Pitt to at least a dozen Pro Football Hall of Famers. And then later down the road, we can have a debate about Andy Lee, whether more than one punter should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. We can have a debate about that. But, all right, well, I appreciate you taking a few extra minutes today. In addition to today's morning pit, you should obviously check that out. We talk about the new football commitment. We talk about the basketball game at Florida State tomorrow. But we had to get in some conversation about Darrelle Revis being elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Stay tuned at Panther-Lair.com to keep up on everything going on in the world of Pitt sports, football, basketball, and recruiting. Thanks so much for checking this out today. Have a great rest of the day. Stay tuned on all our content, and we will talk to you again on Monday with the morning pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.